Hello, it's Justin, and this video is a book review of The Life of Alexander the Great by Plutarch. So, ever since I was a child, I've always been very fascinated by Alexander the Great. I used to read a lot of children's books about ancient Greece and ancient Macedon, and Alexander the Great was a big figure during those times, and I was fascinated about how he conquered so much of the known world back then, and how he inherited just Macedon and most of ancient Greece, and he ended up conquering the entire Persian Empire, and he even pushed forward into modern-day Afghanistan and India. And at the end, his empire stretched from Egypt in the west to India all the way in the east, and from the sands of Arabia in the south to the steppes of Central Asia to the north. And it was a huge empire, and it's very fascinating because of the many adventures he had during his conquest and how much he traveled and how many battles he won and all the stories behind those, and that's always been very fascinating to me. So I recently read The Life of Alexander the Great by Plutarch, and I haven't read this before, but this is a classic. It's one of the traditional biographies of Alexander the Great that scholars and professors would look at and study as a source that was close to the time it actually happened. Because even though Alexander the Great died for 300 years when Plutarch wrote this book, or something like that, Plutarch had access to a lot of primary sources that we do not have today. And I also think that reading this book is very inspiring because Alexander the Great was known for his leadership qualities and his traits for leadership. And as someone who's ambitious, I think people who want to succeed in life should study the lives of successful people. And Alexander, even though he has passed away for over 2,000 years, he has always been known as a man of great achievements. So I would recommend that you study lives of great people, including Alexander the Great, because he was one of the greatest and most successful people of all time. So about the book, it's quite short. It's only 72 pages long, and you can see how thin it is. But the translation I read was by John Dryden, and he was a 17th century English writer. So the English in the book is older English. It's not 21st century English, so it's not as easy to comprehend, but it's still pretty easy to read. It's slower to comprehend, but it's not like older Middle English. It's still modern English. The vocabulary is still modern English. It's just structured in a different way, and the word choices are different, although it's still the same vocabulary as we use today. But obviously, John Dryden uses words that we often don't use today. So you could finish it in a day, but if you really want to enjoy the book and absorb it thoroughly, then I would suggest you take your time to read it, because it is a form of older English. So I took my time to read it, and if you really want to get the most out of this book, don't speed read it. So the book also assumes prior knowledge to ancient Greece and Macedon and Persia, and some prior knowledge of the life of Alexander the Great. It's not a lot of assumptions. Basically, Plutarch, who wrote the book, he was a Roman, and he lived in the Roman Empire during the 1st century AD. And basically, if you had some basic background knowledge, what would be considered common knowledge of Alexander during that time, you would understand everything. And even today, if you remember your facts and what you learned in history class about ancient Greece or Alexander, you would be fine. But if you don't, then you can always Google stuff, and it's really easy nowadays to get background information on Alexander. And you could just, while you read, just Google stuff if you don't have the background info. But for the most part, it doesn't assume too much background information, so you'll be fine. Also, the book is very comprehensive in that it talks about all the major events of Alexander's life, which is very good for someone who wants to read a short book and get all the major details, but it is not very detailed. It doesn't go into the specifics, and most of the events are described in a few sentences or a few paragraphs. So if you're someone who wants a much more detailed account of Alexander's life, then you should read another book. And another book that is a lot more detailed would be The Campaigns of Alexander by Arrian. And I'll also link that down in the description below. So I think reading this book gives people a lot of value because you can learn a lot of the leadership qualities that led Alexander to succeed very well. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was Alexander was always leading from the front. He always fought with his troops and put his life on the line with his troops. And I think this is very inspiring and powerful to his followers, because when you see your leader risking his life, and not just telling you to risk your life, but also risking his own life, you will be much more willing to fight and your morale will go up. But also it's about leadership by example. I think actions speak a lot louder than words, and followers naturally follow the actions of their leaders much more so than the simple words that the leader says, because words are just words, anyone can say them, but actions are much more powerful. And when they see leaders actually performing those actions, they're much more likely to be willing to follow through and be more committed to whatever the leader leads them towards, because the leader is actually doing the stuff himself. He's actually putting in the work, and that inspires people to follow him. So leadership by example is very important, but it's also about getting a lot more respect and admiration from your followers, because Alexander, when he put himself in the front, he risked his life, but he also showed courage, he showed honor, he showed bravery, and that allowed his men to really look up to him and admire him and think of him very highly. And if you're a leader and your followers think of you very highly and respect you, it's a lot easier to get things done than if you're a leader who no one really likes, because then people just do things without a lot of spirit and motivation. So leading by example is very powerful, because actions speak louder than words, and your followers will be much more inspired to follow your actions than to follow your words. And also it will gain the respect and admiration of your followers. So another thing that I thought Alexander displayed was risk-taking. And this also has to do with leadership, because yes, a leader can be successful running an organization without taking a lot of risks. But for the leaders who really change the world, for the leaders who actually take society in a new direction, they are risk takers, because they are stepping into the unknown. They are doing what no one has done before. And that takes risk, because you don't know if you are going to succeed or not. So they are taking a chance, but they are also the ones who are remembered throughout history. And they are the ones that people will remember forever. That people will write books about them, like they wrote so many books about Alexander the Great. People will make movies about them. There's many movies about Alexander. People built statues of them. They name buildings after them. They immortalize them forever, and that's very powerful. People who changed the world, the leaders who changed the world, are the ones who take risks, and they are the ones who are remembered. You always remember the leaders, whoever they are, whether it's Alexander or Julius Caesar or Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, the ones who take risks and really change the world. Because Alexander could have just stayed in Macedon and not conquer Persia, and that would be easy. He would be king and he would enjoy life, but he took a risk, and that changed the world, and we remember him forever. Same with Caesar. Same with Washington. He didn't have to lead the Revolutionary Army. He could have just stayed in his plantation and enjoyed a comfortable life. And same with Lincoln. Lincoln didn't have to force the South to remain a part of the Union and fight for the freedom of blacks in the South. He could have just let the South succeed, and he would still have a big country to run in the United States. But he took the risk. He also didn't even have to run for president, but he believed in his principles and he had convictions, and he took the risk to run for president. He didn't know he was going to succeed, and he took the risk to fight the South, and he didn't know he was going to succeed. And now we have the Lincoln Memorial. Now we remember him forever. And even business leaders, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, the ones who invented the digital landscape we live in now, those are the people we remember. We don't remember all the other CEOs of Microsoft or Apple. We don't remember most presidents. Well, I do, but most people don't remember most presidents, but they remember the ones who changed the world. And all of them who changed the world took risk and led the world into a new direction because they were willing to take the risk to step into the unknown. So the last thing about leadership that I wanted to talk about Alexander was honor, because Alexander was a man of honor. He always rewarded favors generously and sometimes very lavishly, and he would reward his men with large shares of the plunder of the conquered peoples and kingdoms they went through. And he was also a person who would not take an insult unanswered. He was always willing to guard his reputation and maintain his dignity and reputation. And you can see this in the beginning of Alexander's reign. Because when Alexander succeeded the kingdom of Macedon, Thebes rebelled against Alexander. And Alexander completely destroyed Thebes. He killed the entire male population, and he sold the women and children into slavery and burned the city down. And yes, this was brutal, but this was the ancient world. But it showed that Alexander was a man of honor, and he would retaliate against offenses against him mercilessly because he had a reputation to uphold. And likewise, you can see this later on. So another famous incident was when he killed Clytus the Black, who was one of the Macedonian generals, and he was very popular. He saved Alexander's life in the Battle of Granicus because a Persian officer named Spithrades was about to kill Alexander with his weapon, but Clytus the Black caught him in time and cut off the arm of the Persian officer, which saved Alexander's life. And he was also friends with Alexander, but during a drunken argument in some Eastern Persian city or some Indian city, I forgot where exactly, Clytus insulted Alexander to his face, and Alexander stabbed him with a spear. And that was definitely something that would be considered a very powerful reaction. Alexander was not someone who let insults go unanswered. He always upheld his reputation. And he did regret it. He did mourn for Clytus because he was a friend of his. But it shows that Alexander was always someone who cared about honor, who always rewarded people with who gave him favors, and he always retaliated against people who brought him down and offended him. And I think a lot of people don't agree with this, but I personally believe in having a sense of honor, and that's important. And as a leader in the modern world, or as a person in the modern world, if you reward people for favors, if you repay favors, that's a good thing because it encourages people to treat you well. And if you retaliate against people who offend you or who insult you, then that disincentivizes people from treating you badly. So I think that's important. And also it's mostly about upholding your own reputation and dignity, because your reputation is very important. It's very easy to lose. It's very hard to make, and it's very easy to lose, and you have to uphold it. And it's also your personal dignity. If you're someone who just lets people treat you badly, you're not going to feel good about yourself. And if you're someone who doesn't treat other people well, if they treat you well, that's not good for you either. So I think that's very important, and people, unfortunately, in the modern day, don't have a lot of sense of honor, but I think it's still important. And it just creates a better culture because you're encouraging people to behave well and you're discouraging people from bad conduct. So this isn't just about leadership, this is also about just life in general. And I think a lot of Alexander's qualities, it aren't just leadership qualities, they're qualities for anyone to succeed, whether if you're a leader or just a normal person. Qualities like persistence, fortitude, courage, industriousness, toughness. These are all qualities that are very important if you want to succeed in life. So it's always good to learn about successful people, and Alexander was one of the most successful people of all time. There's great value in learning from them because these people don't just talk to talk, they actually have done a lot of stuff and they have achieved a lot. And you could gain a lot of value from learning about how they got to where they were, how they succeeded, and also their personalities and characteristics that contributed to their success. So if you want to do that, and if you want to learn about Alexander the Great's life, then I would highly recommend this book. There's the Amazon link in the description below. Also, if you want more background info about Alexander, there's a fantastic documentary on YouTube by Epic History TV, and I'll also link that down below. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and hit the bell notification so you get notified when new videos come out. Also, like and comment, and follow me on Instagram where you can DM me, and follow me on Medium where I write about the same topics I talk about on YouTube. Thank you, and see you next time.